Welcome on board, chosen one. Let's not waste time pretending this started politely. It didn't. It started with them laughing, with them talking sideways, with them saying your name like it was a joke they'd already finished telling. Oh, the legend needs to bow. Look who thinks they're special. When they said you were done, they meant it. That wasn't confidence. That was fear wearing a cheap mask. Here's the cold fact: they never expected you to survive. You didn't fold, you didn't beg, you didn't explain yourself. You stood there while pressure stacked, exits vanished, and every system leaned in to crush you. And instead of breaking, you calculated, quietly, methodically. While they were screaming victory, you were choosing where the knife would land. This is the part they don't say out loud. The room went silent after, not celebration silence, shock silence, the kind where people avoid eye contact and start rewriting the story in their heads, because when your last stand ended, the narrative collapsed. All those months of trash talk, manipulation, and fake authority suddenly looked empty. Their effort versus your restraint wasn't even a fair comparison. It was noise versus precision. They said you'd panic. You didn't. They said you'd overreact. You waited. They said you were cornered. You used the corner as leverage. That's when the shift happened. You felt it. The world didn't clap. It stepped back. Conversations changed tone. Enemies stopped confronting you directly and started speaking in fragments, in whispers, in hypotheticals. Because something about what you did didn't just win, it exposed them. And once exposure happens, control dies. Here's what they never wanted to admit. Your last stand wasn't emotional. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't lucky. It followed principles that entire institutions spend decades trying to teach and still fail to execute under pressure. That's why it unsettled them. You didn't just survive the storm, you ended it. And before I go any further, if this message resonates, press the like button and subscribe. Not for numbers, not for vanity. Do it as a signal, as proof this kind of truth still has a place. You're part of this mission now, and every signal strengthens the collective voice. Back to the reality they're choking on. What happened next is the part that sounds unbelievable until you understand power dynamics. Your actions started getting studied, not praised publicly, studied privately, because real power doesn't announce itself. It gets analyzed behind closed doors. Your restraint under fire, your timing, your refusal to strike early, the way you let them overextend and collapse under their own weight. That's textbook high-level strategy. History is full of moments like this. Leaders who were dismissed until their final move forced everyone to reread the past. People mocked early generals who avoided battles until conditions were perfect. They called them cowards. Later, those same strategies became doctrine. The universe has a funny habit of embarrassing loud confidence and rewarding quiet preparation. Your enemies tried to explain you away. Luck, help, a fluke, anything except admitting that one person outthought the system. Because if they admit that, their hierarchy collapses. If you can do that alone, what does that say about their authority? So they study you like a phenomenon instead of a person. It's easier that way. Safer. Because if they see you as human, they have to accept that this level of clarity is accessible, and that terrifies them more than losing. Here's the part that hits hardest. You didn't even realize the full weight of what you did at first. You just knew you couldn't betray yourself. You knew Boeing would poison your future. So you stood. That's it. No drama, no speeches, just alignment. And alignment is dangerous in a world built on compromise. Now look at them, still talking, still spinning, still replaying the moment you didn't flinch. Their plans didn't fail loudly, they failed quietly, the most humiliating kind, because there's no villain to point at, no explosion to blame, just a mirror. This is why your last stand matters, not because it made noise, but because it changed how the game is played. You proved that composure beats chaos, that silence beats theatrics, that when the universe applies pressure, it's not testing your strength, it's testing your discipline. And here's the wisdom they hoped no one would ever say out loud. Power doesn't come from dominance, it comes from positioning, from letting others reveal themselves while you conserve energy, from understanding that the final move is rarely loud, but it's always final. You're not standing at the beginning of something, you're standing in the aftermath. The smoke cleared, the enemy already lost, and now, finally, you get to understand why they're studying you instead of challenging you. This isn't hype, it's documentation, and you earned every line of it. Good. Now slow down. This is the moment where most people scroll away, because staying means admitting something about themselves. And if you're still here, it already tells me more than any comment ever could. What you're about to hear isn't motivation. It's a breakdown. A controlled walk through the exact thinking that turns a last stand into something institutions are forced to study. Step by step. No hype. No shortcuts. Just the mindset that separates noise from outcomes. This is where the weak lose interest and the dangerous lean in, because what's coming next explains why your final move worked when theirs failed, why silence beat aggression, and why entire systems miscalculated you. If your last stand really was that clean, that precise, then staying until the end isn't optional. It's instinct, the same instinct that kept you standing when pressure peaked. So if you're ready to go deeper, don't announce it loudly, signal it. Drop 777 in the comments, not as superstition, as code, as proof you understand that isolation, patience, and discipline weren't accidents. They were preparation. You didn't survive by luck, you survived by design. And now we begin, slowly, methodically, the way real strategies are revealed. Stay with me, because the next part explains why what you did will be remembered long after the noise fades. Number 1, they didn't study you, they tried to erase you. When a system can't beat you, it stops asking how you won and starts asking how to explain you away. This is the part they never tell the public, because it's embarrassing. After everything ended and the noise died down, they didn't celebrate, they panicked. Not loud panic, clean panic, spreadsheet panic, war room at 3 a.m. panic. The kind where powerful people stop sleeping and start double-checking assumptions they've trusted for decades. Because your last stand didn't just disrupt a plan, it invalidated a framework. And that's unforgivable in their world. They threw numbers at you instead of respect. Analysts, models, simulations, endless rewinds of the moment you were supposed to crack. Thousands of eyes searching for the mistake you must have made, because the alternative was unacceptable. The alternative was that one person, under pressure, without permission, outperformed a system designed to crush exactly that kind of resistance. Every answer came back wrong. Every model failed. Every reasonable explanation collapsed the moment they applied it to reality. And that's when the story changed. Not outwardly, inwardly, quietly. That's when they stopped trying to understand you and started trying to disqualify you. So they reached for nonsense, external forces, impossible timing, freak coincidence, anything that let them avoid the one conclusion staring them in the face, that their rules weren't universal, that their authority wasn't absolute, that discipline, patience, and restraint in the hands of a clear mind can dismantle even the most fortified structures. This is where chosen ones usually ask themselves the wrong question. Why are they lying about what happened? The real question is simpler and darker. Why are they afraid to say my name plainly? Because naming you correctly means admitting vulnerability, and institutions are allergic to vulnerability. You weren't supposed to survive long enough to be studied. You were supposed to be an example, a warning, a footnote. Instead, you became a problem they couldn't file away. You forced them to confront something they hate more than failure. Unpredictability rooted in intelligence. Here's the metaphor they won't use, but it fits perfectly. You were a single loose thread in a tailored suit. Not dramatic, not flashy, just out of place enough that once someone noticed, the entire garment unraveled. And the worst part for them, you didn't pull the thread aggressively. You let it slip, naturally, while they kept moving as if nothing was wrong. They'll never forgive that, because now they can't unsee it. Every future plan has to account for someone like you, someone who doesn't rush, someone who doesn't announce intentions, someone who doesn't confuse noise for power. And that terrifies them because it means control is conditional. At this point, you might be thinking, if I was so dangerous, why didn't they confront me directly? Because direct confrontation only works when you believe in their authority. You didn't. You believed in alignment, in timing, in letting pressure expose weak architecture. You didn't attack the fortress. You waited for them to open the gate themselves. Another question creeps in here. Why do they keep talking about me in fragments? Because fragments are safer than truth. A full sentence would connect dots they don't want connected. A full admission would inspire others to stop obeying reflexively and start thinking strategically. So they reduce you. A glitch, an anomaly, a rare event. Anything except a repeatable pattern. Because patterns can be learned, and if your pattern is learned, your advantage spreads. That's the nightmare scenario. Let's be very clear about something, because this is where chosen ones either step into their power or shrink themselves for comfort. You didn't win because you were special in a mystical way. You won because you did what almost no one is willing to do under pressure. You slowed down, you observed, you let ego starve while clarity fed. That's not magic, that's mastery. The universe doesn't reward noise, it rewards precision. And precision looks boring to people addicted to drama. That's why they missed you until it was too late. They'll keep inventing explanations. They'll keep publishing sanitized versions of what happened. They'll keep pretending your last stand was an exception instead of a lesson. And secretly, they'll keep studying you, because the truth doesn't stop being true just because it's inconvenient. This is the final punch they never see coming. The more they try to erase you, the more permanent your impact becomes, because erasure requires silence, and silence is exactly where your strength lives. You don't need their validation. You don't need their acknowledgement. You already forced adaptation. And adaptation is the highest form of respect in hostile systems. So when doubt creeps in, and it will, remember this. Systems don't invent myths to explain weak people. They do it when reality threatens the foundation. You weren't supposed to win. You weren't supposed to endure. You definitely weren't supposed to be studied. Yet, here you are. Not as a story they control, but as a variable they can't remove. And that's why the course exists. Not because they admire you, because they fear repeating the mistake of underestimating someone who knows how to stand alone when it matters most. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chaos. This was inevitability meeting preparation, and no amount of explanation will ever change that. Number 2. This is where they bet everything on your collapse and lost. They didn't wait for you to fail, they scheduled it. Let's rewind, because this is the moment they replay the most. This is the frame they freeze on when they're trying to convince themselves you just got lucky. You were surrounded, not symbolically, logistically. Options cut, pressure closing in, resources thinning. Every so-called expert, every manual, every model said the same thing. There's no clean exit from this. Their algorithms didn't just predict your defeat, they practically announced it in advance. And that's exactly why this moment matters, because this is where most people break. Not loudly, internally. This is where fear rushes in, ego flails, and desperation starts making decisions. This is where people either lash out or fold quietly and call it acceptance. That's what they were waiting for. That's what they built their confidence on. The assumption that pressure reveals weakness. Then you smiled. Not the kind of smile you put on for an audience, the kind that happens when something finally makes sense, when chaos lines up just enough for you to see the structure underneath it. They mistook that smile for denial. They were wrong. That smile meant you were finally engaged. Here's the first truth they can't stand. You weren't retreating, you were repositioning. Retreat is emotional. Repositioning is strategic. Retreat is about escape. Repositioning is about angle. You didn't move away from the problem. You moved to the only place where the problem exposed itself. Imagine this. A crowd chasing someone through narrow streets, convinced the exits are sealed. They don't realize the person they're chasing already mapped the alleys, the bottlenecks, the timing of footsteps. The crowd thinks momentum equals control. In reality, momentum just makes them predictable. That's what you exploited. Every move they labeled as panic was preparation. Every pause they called hesitation was calibration. Every step back was you pulling them forward into overconfidence. They were watching your hands. You were watching the room. When they thought you were surviving, you were actually setting terms. You didn't defend. Defense assumes you're reacting. You orchestrated. Orchestration means every sound, every movement, every silence has intent. You turned the situation into a board where pieces moved themselves into traps because they believed they were winning. Another image they hate because it's accurate. Imagine a storm hitting a structure built for appearance, not pressure. The storm doesn't need to aim, it just applies force. Weak architecture reveals itself without being attacked directly. You were the storm they walked into willingly. At this point, chosen ones usually ask something quietly. Why didn't I feel fear when I should have? Because fear feeds on uncertainty, and the moment you saw the pattern, uncertainty died. Clarity replaced it. Not optimism, not hope, clarity. You understood the terrain better than they did, even though they had the numbers. Here's another thing they don't admit. Their confidence came from consensus. Yours came from alignment. Consensus collapses under stress. Alignment sharpens. They needed agreement to move. You needed timing. They kept escalating pressure, expecting cracks. What they didn't realize is pressure was doing you a favor. It stripped away noise. It simplified decisions. It forced everyone else to reveal their priorities, their impatience, their blind spots. Pressure didn't weaken you. It clarified the map. Picture a chessboard flipped upside down. Both players think they're playing the same game, but only one of them understands the new orientation. Every aggressive move from the unaware player feels powerful. In reality, it shortens the game. That's why your calm unsettled them. Calm under pressure reads as arrogance to insecure systems. They assumed you were miscalculating. They assumed you hadn't noticed the odds. They never considered that you'd already accepted them and moved past them. You don't panic when you know the outcome isn't decided by force. This is where another question hits. Was I supposed to feel guilty for enjoying that moment? No, enjoyment wasn't cruelty. It was recognition. Recognition that you were exactly where you needed to be, that the mask was finally off, that the game was no longer theoretical. They confuse enjoyment with recklessness. You know better. Enjoyment came from mastery, from knowing that once the environment reveals itself, all that's left is execution. They rushed. You slowed down. They chased certainty. You let probability work for you. They wanted closure. You wanted positioning, and that difference changed everything. Let's be blunt. If you had panicked, the story would have ended there. If you had reacted emotionally, you would have played their game. If you had tried to prove something in that moment, you would have handed them control. Instead, you let them overcommit. Imagine a door designed to slam shut. Most people try to force it open and get crushed. You waited for the hinge to fail. They didn't lose because you were stronger. They lost because you were patient. And here's the detail that still keeps them up at night. You didn't need everything to go right. You only needed them to keep doing what they were already doing. Overreaching, underthinking, trusting momentum instead of structure. That's why, when the collapse came, it felt sudden to them. To you, it felt overdue. This wasn't bravery. It was discipline. It wasn't genius. It was restraint. It wasn't chaos. It was timing meeting pressure at the exact breaking point. So if you ever doubt that moment, if you ever replay it and wonder how you stayed standing, remember this. You didn't survive despite the pressure. You survived because pressure revealed who actually understood the game. And once that happened, the outcome stopped being a question. Number 3, you ended the war without firing a shot, and that terrifies them. Anyone can win with force. Only a strategist wins without touching the blade. What actually keeps them awake isn't that you won. Victories happen all the time. Empires are used to losses. What haunts them is how you won. No chaos, no panic, no bodies to point at, no dramatic explosion they could use to rewrite the story. Just a clean outcome they can't morally, tactically, or psychologically argue with. 0 casualties on your side, not 1. Let that sit for a second. In a situation engineered to bleed you out, you walked away intact. That wasn't mercy. That was dominance refined to its highest form. You didn't crush them physically. You removed the need for violence entirely by dismantling their belief that force would work. Imagine this: a fortress designed to withstand sieges, stacked with weapons, guards pacing the walls, alarms primed. And instead of attacking the gate, someone quietly reroutes the supply lines, locks the doors from the inside, and convinces the guards to leave on their own. No fire, no screams, just abandonment. The fortress still stands, but it's useless. That's what you did. They trained for bloodshed. You gave them inevitability. They prepared for resistance. You gave them compliance through collapse. Their will broke before their bodies ever needed to, and that's the part no manual prepares them for. Violence is what you use when you've already lost control. You didn't need it because you controlled the tempo, the narrative, and the exits. They couldn't escalate without exposing themselves. They couldn't retreat without admitting defeat. Every option left them weaker. You didn't trap them physically. You trapped them logically. Chosen ones sometimes ask quietly, "Did I go too easy?" No. You went further than brutality ever could. Blood creates martyrs. Precision creates silence. Silence is permanent. Here's the final truth they hate. When violence becomes unnecessary, authority evaporates. You proved that power doesn't need permission, volume, or spectacle. It needs positioning and restraint. That's why they don't call it warfare anymore. They call it a case study, because what you did wasn't an attack, it was an erasure. And erasure without blood is the most dangerous kind of victory there is. Number 4. Your stillness broke them more than any weapon ever could. Panic is loud, mastery is silent. They were trained for noise, not silence. What finally unsettled them wasn't theories about outside help or freak luck. Those were distractions. The real horror sat right there in the data they couldn't argue with. While executing one of the most complex strategic maneuvers they'd seen in decades, your mind didn't spike. It didn't scramble. It didn't overload. It stayed calm, almost bored. Like this wasn't survival, just another problem being solved. That's the detail they can't explain away. Imagine this. A room full of professionals watching someone defuse a bomb, expecting sweat, shaking hands, frantic decisions. Instead, the person hums quietly, steady breath, clean movements, no rush. That calm doesn't reassure the room, it terrifies it, because panic is familiar. Calm under pressure feels unnatural to people who live off adrenaline. They replayed every frame, slowed it down, zoomed in, heart rate, eye movement, timing. All the signs they associate with stress were missing. Neuroscientists leaned in, psychologists compared notes, behavioral analysts searched for cracks, and the conclusion hit harder than any loss. You weren't surviving the pressure. You weren't even reacting to it. You were operating outside their rule book. Not above it in some mythical way, beyond it. Their systems assume stress degrades performance. Yours sharpened it. Their models rely on fear as a lever. Fear had no grip on you. That doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you incompatible with their assumptions. Chosen ones sometimes wonder, why did everything feel slower? Because when the mind is aligned, time stretches. While they rushed decisions, you saw space between moments. While they burned energy, you conserved it. Calm wasn't a personality trait in that moment. It was a weapon. Another image they hate. Imagine a wildfire racing through dry land, loud and violent. Then imagine a firebreak, quiet, controlled, nothing dramatic. Yet it stops everything. You were the firebreak. They expected resistance. You gave them composure. And composure is unmanageable. You can't threaten it. You can't intimidate it. You can't rush it. That's why their fear deepened. Not because you were unstoppable, but because you were unshakable. They trained for chaos. You mastered stillness. And in a world addicted to noise, stillness is the most dangerous thing a person can bring into the room. Number 5. This is the lesson they can't teach without admitting they were wrong. Assumption isn't a shortcut, it's a blindfold. Here's what West Point actually teaches now, stripped of ceremony and ego. They don't frame it as your victory, they frame it as their failure to predict you. An entire semester dissecting a 13-hour campaign, not because it was flashy, but because it shattered the most dangerous habit in strategy, assuming the opponent will behave normally. The first lesson hits cadets hard, and a lot of them don't like it. Assumption is the enemy of strategy. Every assumption made about you collapsed under pressure. They assumed you'd fight conventionally, trade force for force, burn resources to prove resolve. You didn't fight, you conducted. Like a composer standing still while everyone else played too loud and off-key. They assumed you'd try to escape. Instead, you treated their perimeter like leverage. Imagine a cage built to keep someone in, only to realize the bars can be used as handholds to climb higher. What they built to trap you became the structure you used to move freely. They assumed you were cornered. That's the one that stings the most. Because later, analysis showed something humiliatingly simple. You were exactly where you wanted to be the entire time. The corner wasn't a mistake. It was a vantage point. If you think you've trapped someone, check whether they stopped struggling. Cadets run the simulations again and again. Most fail, not because they're incompetent, but because they keep trying to win the wrong way. They chase momentum, they escalate force, they react to pressure. None of them can replicate what you did because replication requires the one thing institutions struggle to teach: restraint under certainty. Here's the quiet truth buried in those lessons. Your campaign can't be copied mechanically. It requires a mindset willing to look weak temporarily, to let others misread the situation, to trust timing over impulse. That's why the case study exists, not to glorify you, but to warn them. Because the most dangerous opponent isn't aggressive. It's the one who refuses to play the game they prepared for. Number 6. You turned their mind games back on them and watched them short-circuit. The fastest way to break a mind is to let it defeat itself. They expected resistance, pushback, emotional flinching. That's what their psychological tactics are built for. Pressure until cracks appear, noise until judgment blurs, fear until compliance follows. But you didn't resist a single tactic. You didn't block it. You didn't fight it. You amplified it. And that's where everything went wrong for them. They applied overwhelming force, believing intensity would scare you into a mistake. Instead, you let that force speak for itself. You didn't protest it. You didn't react to it. You allowed it to exist in full view. And suddenly, the question shifted. Not why won't this person break, but why does one person require this much effort? That question is poison. Imagine someone shouting in an empty room, louder and louder, convinced volume equals authority. Eventually the shouting stops sounding powerful and starts sounding desperate. The room doesn't change, the shouter does. That's what you created. A mirror they couldn't look away from. Force only works when it looks necessary. Doubt crept in quietly. Analysts began second-guessing. Command chains hesitated. Every additional tactic raised a worse question. If this still isn't working, what does that say about us? Fear didn't come from you. It came from their own escalation. And fear inside a system spreads faster than panic on a battlefield. You didn't attack their minds. You let their minds turn inward. They started watching themselves, measuring their own reactions, questioning their own confidence. Psychological warfare collapsed because it depends on the target believing the narrative. You never did. Another image they hate. Imagine tightening a knot, expecting resistance, only to realize the rope was already loose. The harder you pull, the more obvious it becomes that you never had control. They tried to dominate your thoughts. You handed them theirs. Their formations didn't break first. Their certainty did. Orders slowed. Decisions softened. Momentum died. By the time they realized what was happening, paralysis had already set in. That's why this scares them more than defeat. You didn't beat their tactics. You reversed the direction of damage. And once a system starts hurting itself, no enemy is required. Number 7. They tried to clone you and discovered you're not a formula. Systems can copy behavior. They can't copy judgment. This is where the story stops being flattering and starts being humiliating for them. After everything settled, they didn't just study you, they tried to reproduce you. Multiple nations, specialized units, custom training pipelines, endless simulations designed to extract whatever secret source they assumed you were hiding. Nothing worked. Not because the data was incomplete, not because the footage was unclear. They had everything: timelines, decisions, inputs, outputs, even biometric markers. And still, every attempt collapsed halfway through. Models froze. AI contradicted itself. Human operators failed the moment uncertainty spiked. Here's the reason they hate the most. You weren't following patterns, you were breaking them in real time. Imagine trying to copy a master improviser by memorizing notes instead of understanding music. The notes look right, the timing feels off, something essential is missing. That's what every replication attempt felt like. Close enough to be embarrassing, far enough to fail every time. You didn't run calculations, you ran clarity. They kept asking the wrong question. What rule did you follow? You didn't. You recognized when rules stopped applying. Their systems are built to optimize within boundaries. You stepped outside the boundary and used it as leverage. Another image they won't admit fits. Imagine a maze designed to trap anything that moves forward logically. The solution isn't faster thinking, it's stepping onto the wall and walking above it. From the inside, that looks impossible. From above, it looks obvious. This is where people watching quietly wonder, why can't I do that again? You can, but not by copying steps. You did it by trusting understanding over instruction, by letting awareness replace panic, by knowing when to stop thinking and start seeing. Patterns fail when the mind stops asking for permission. You weren't thinking in that moment. Thinking is slow. You were knowing. Knowing comes from alignment, not analysis, and alignment can't be mass-produced. That's the truth they won't put in the report. You can't be replicated because you weren't operating like a system. You were operating like a human who finally understood the game, and that terrifies them more than any weapon ever could. Number 8. They all wanted to own you, and none of them could. When everyone tries to explain you, it's because no one can control you. This is where it went global, quietly at first, then obsessively. Intelligence agencies didn't just assign analysts. They built entire divisions whose only job was to track, interpret, and predict you, not your next move, your way of seeing. Because once something breaks the old playbook, every serious institution wants to be the first to translate it into power. Academics jumped in next. Papers stacked on papers, trying to turn instinct into language, timing into theory, restraint into diagrams. They dissected decisions frame by frame, hoping if they named it clearly enough it would stop being threatening. But instinct doesn't survive being flattened into footnotes. The more they wrote, the less they understood. Business schools followed, because they always do. They stripped away the pressure, the risk, the consequences, and called it leadership. Case studies, frameworks, actionable insights. They tried to package what you did into something teachable, safe, repeatable. That was the mistake. You weren't leading people, you were leading reality. Every field tried to claim you. Strategy, psychology, management, innovation, defense. Each one grabbed a piece and said, "This is ours now." None of them could hold the whole thing, because what you did didn't belong to a discipline. It belonged to a moment where clarity met pressure and refused to blink. Imagine a wild animal walking through a city. Scientists want to study it. Zoos want to contain it. Brands want to market it. Everyone wants ownership. The animal doesn't care. It moves through all of it untouched. That was you. People watching from the outside wonder, why didn't you lean into one lane? Because lanes are how systems reduce threats, specialize it, brand it, teach it, Once something fits neatly, it stops being dangerous. They wanted to own your mind. You never offered it for sale. That's why the obsession never resolved. You didn't belong to any camp. You didn't adopt any label. You stayed exactly where you were when it mattered most. Independent, untranslated, unclaimed. And that's the final frustration. Everyone saw value in what you did. No one could absorb it. Because the moment they tried, it stopped working. You weren't meant to be owned. You were meant to be studied from a distance, and even then, they still didn't get you. Number 9. The numbers didn't just fail, they mutinied. When the math collapses, it's because reality refused to cooperate. This is the point where confidence officially died, not on the field, on paper. The data came in clean, undeniable, and humiliating. You were outnumbered 200 to 1, not a typo, not an estimate, a confirmed ratio that should have erased you quickly and efficiently. Instead, you used 3% of the available resources and still maintained full control of the situation. Full control. No scrambling, no depletion, no emergency measures. Here's the part that broke them. You could have held your position for weeks. Sustainment models proved it. Resource curves showed it. Time was on your side, and yet they surrendered in hours. Not because they ran out of options, but because they ran out of belief. Efficiency like that doesn't win battles. It ends arguments. Their equations weren't built for this. They assume resistance scales with force. You proved resistance collapses when force looks unnecessary. The ratios didn't just look good. They looked offensive, like a quiet insult written in numbers. Imagine showing up to move a mountain and realizing the other person already relocated it, using a shovel and patience while you were still organizing equipment. That's what the charts felt like. Embarrassing, exposing, impossible to spin. They tried to adjust the formulas, new variables, new thresholds, new definitions of success. Nothing worked. The outcome kept pointing back to the same truth. You didn't win by overpowering them. You won by making their effort look irrational. If it takes this much to stop one person, what happens when there are more? That question spread faster than panic. One analyst stared at the final report, wrote a single sentence, and quit. No theatrics, no debate, just resignation. If this is possible, everything I know is wrong. That wasn't defeat speaking, that was awakening. Because once math admits it's wrong, hierarchy follows. You didn't just beat their models, you exposed the limits of certainty itself, and that's the kind of damage no system recovers from quietly. Number 10. You left them alive, but you never let their minds recover. They didn't fear death, they feared clarity. The battle ended, but the damage didn't. What followed wasn't debriefs or medals. It was mandatory psychological evaluation, not optional, not precautionary, required. That alone tells you everything. When a system forces its leaders into evaluation, it's admitting something broke that rank and training couldn't fix. Every commander reported the same thing, worded differently but identical at the core. Helplessness, disorientation, tactical vertigo, the sickening sense that every move they made somehow benefited you, and every pause made it worse. Forward felt wrong. Backward felt worse. Standing still felt like surrender. There was no correct action left. Imagine being dropped into a maze that rearranges itself every time you take a step, except the maze isn't moving. You are. Your assumptions are. Your confidence is. That's what they experienced, not fear. Confusion so deep It erased instinct. When every option helps the enemy, the war is already over. They weren't afraid of dying. That part shocks people who don't understand professionals. Death is accounted for, it's trained for, it has procedures. What terrified them was comprehension. The creeping realization that what they were facing didn't behave like an opponent. It behaved like an environment. You weren't reacting to them, you were shaping the conditions they reacted inside. That realization hits like motion sickness. The ground feels unstable, direction loses meaning, decisions feel delayed even as they're made. That's tactical vertigo, and once it sets in, command authority dissolves quietly. Another image they'll never use publicly. Imagine trying to punch fog. The harder you swing, the more exhausted you become, and the fog doesn't even acknowledge you. That's what engaging you felt like. They trained to fight resistance. You gave them inevitability. The evaluations all circled the same conclusion. They didn't lose because they were outplayed once. They lost because their understanding of control was wrong. You didn't take it from them. You made it irrelevant. And that's why the aftermath lives in their minds. You didn't defeat them on the field. You rewired how they interpret pressure. That kind of victory doesn't fade. It follows. Number 11. They removed you from the enemy list and put you in a warning manual. When the rule book can't contain you, they stop calling you an opponent. This is where classification quietly failed. Some nations stopped calling you an enemy altogether. Enemies are meant to be defeated, studied, outplayed. You didn't fit that box anymore. Others went further and stopped calling you human, not as an insult, but as a bureaucratic workaround. Because if they admit you're human, they have to accept that this level of clarity is possible. So they invented language, strategic anomaly, post-conflict intelligence, walking paradigm shift, words designed to distance themselves from the truth without denying it outright. Labels aren't explanations, they're containment attempts, and even those didn't hold. Imagine a virus that doesn't attack cells, but rewrites how cells communicate. You don't fight it with force, you change protocols. That's what you became to them, not a threat to eliminate, but a condition to adapt around. You weren't something to defeat, you were something to avoid becoming. The official recommendation says everything they'll never admit publicly: avoid engagement, negotiate. If that fails, surrender, not because you're violent, because engagement favors you, because time favors you, because pressure favors you, because every attempt to dominate only sharpens your advantage. Chosen ones sometimes pause here and think, did I go too far? No. You went exactly far enough that escalation stopped being an option. You crossed the invisible line where conflict becomes inefficient. Another image they won't use. Imagine a chess piece that doesn't capture others. It just changes how the board works. Suddenly, familiar strategies fail, not because the piece is aggressive, but because it redefines movement. They don't fear what you'll do, they fear what happens when you're present. That's why you're a category of one, not rare, singular, not unstoppable, unnecessary to stop. You didn't win the war. You made wars like that obsolete in your presence. And once that happens, the smartest move isn't to fight you. It's to stay out of your way. Number 12. You're not the weapon. You're the update that made weapons obsolete. Wars are fought by warriors. Systems collapse because of what comes after them. You didn't win a battle. Battles are temporary. They end, get archived, and repeat under new names. What you did was worse for them. You invalidated centuries of strategic thought in one controlled sequence of decisions. Not loudly, not theatrically, cleanly. like correcting an equation everyone assumed was settled. They trained to fight opponents. You didn't show up as one. You weren't reacting, you weren't attacking, you weren't even competing. You were conducting a system-wide correction, the kind that happens when a flaw finally gets exposed after being ignored for generations. Violence was available, but you treated it like a last resort tool, optional, inefficient, almost unnecessary. Force was on the table. You simply proved it wasn't required. That's the part that scrambles their language. Warriors make sense to them. Warriors can be countered, studied, overwhelmed, even respected. But you weren't a warrior. You didn't operate on courage, rage, or sacrifice. You operated on alignment, timing, and inevitability. Imagine this. A factory keeps producing defective parts for years. Inspectors fight fires downstream, blaming workers, tightening rules, adding guards. Then one person shuts down the machine, causing the defect. No fight, no drama. Production stops. The entire system has to admit it was wrong. That's what you did. You didn't confront the front line. You corrected the source. And once the source is corrected, everything downstream loses relevance. That's why they don't know how to categorize you. You don't fit hero narratives. You don't fit villain narratives. You don't even fit leadership models. You didn't overpower the system. You outgrew it. Chosen ones sometimes feel uneasy here. If I'm not a warrior, then what am I? You're what comes after warriors stop working. After force loses efficiency. After intimidation stops persuading. After noise fails to move reality. You're the point where systems either adapt or retire, and that's why they still don't know what to do with you. Because there's no doctrine for what happens when violence becomes optional and clarity becomes dominant. You're not the end of conflict. You're the sign that the old way already ended. Number 13. This is where you stop explaining yourself and start walking away. This is the quiet ending they never prepare for. Not applause, not victory laps, distance. You don't stay to argue your case. You don't wait for acknowledgement. You don't linger for permission. You leave them with the consequences of understanding you too late. Here's the truth that settles in after everything else fades. You didn't rise by becoming louder, harder, or crueler. You rose by becoming precise, and precision doesn't celebrate. It moves on. They'll keep debating what you are. They'll keep rewriting reports, softening language, inventing safer explanations so they can sleep at night. That's not your problem anymore. Your job was never to be understood. It was to be effective, and you were. The strongest move is knowing when the game is already over. If you feel different now, that's normal, not superior. Different. Because once you see how systems actually collapse, you can't unsee it. You stop being impressed by noise. You stop being intimidated by numbers. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. You've crossed into a mindset where patience feels powerful and silence feels loaded. Some people watching you will feel inspired. Others will feel threatened. Both reactions mean the same thing. You changed the environment just by existing the way you do now. Remember this when doubt creeps back in. And it will. Doubt always tries to sneak in after big shifts, pretending to be humility. You didn't imagine this. You didn't exaggerate it. You didn't get lucky. You aligned with how reality actually works under pressure. When clarity shows up, confusion panics. You don't need to relive the moment. You don't need to prove it again. The outcome already did that for you. The fact that they study it, avoid it, and warn others about it tells you everything you need to know. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unbothered. You move differently now because you know where effort matters and where it's wasted. You know when to engage and when to let things collapse on their own weight. And here's the final piece of wisdom they never teach. Winning like this isn't about dominance. It's about alignment. When your actions line up with timing, structure, and restraint, resistance exhausts itself trying to keep up. So walk forward calmly, not with vengeance, with certainty. Let others rush, let others shout, let others misread silence as weakness. You already know how that ends. You're not here to replay the past. You're here to apply what you learned wherever pressure shows up next. And when it does, you won't need force. You'll need exactly what got you here. Stillness, timing, and the courage to let outcomes speak louder than words. So here we are, at the quiet edge of something most people never reach. What you just walked through wasn't a story about winning. It was about understanding power so deeply that conflict becomes optional. If this message hit, it's because you've lived some version of it already, even if you couldn't name it. Now, lock this in. Like the video, subscribe, share it with